So I love this focus because ever since Li Dengwei laid out the National Unification Guidelines in the early to mid-1990s, this has seemed obvious and inescapable. That the only way, the only way one, whether speaking analytically or as a policymaker in Taiwan, could really even contemplate political integration would be, well, if the two sides moved closer together economically, and that's been happening, but also if they were both democracies, and then, force kind of disappears as a coercive solution to the problem, and you negotiate, and maybe there would be a federal arrangement, maybe there'd be a confederal arrangement, unlike anything anyone had thought of, but, you can kind of negotiate and work it out. And the threat of some kind of re-entry into at least some kind of overarching political framework called the single China, is not so intimidating. People don't necessarily have to contemplate losing their freedom and their identity. And even going down the incremental path, which is looking increasingly sorry that Hong Kong is going through now. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think for Ma to resurrect it and for you to resurrect it, I think are both very intelligent strategies for a political leader and a scholar. And I also think that it's very much, we were talking about this earlier, in the interest of the Chinese Communist Party, of Xi Jinping personally, and of China, mainland China, the PRC, as a country and a society, to go down the path of peaceful evolution. And Chiang Ching-Kuo laid out a model for how you could do it. It was, it was a Leninist party. It's kind of plausible and it's adaptable. But here's the thing: it doesn't look like Xi Jinping is going to do this. It looks like he's doing just the opposite. He's doubling down. Maybe he's not going back to 1920s communism or even the heyday of Maoism, but he's kind of moving in that direction. And he's certainly becoming the most powerful communist leader probably since Mao. And so I think another question that could be asked is, and then there are people who say, including a mutual friend of ours who I won't name, it's just sequencing. He's going to do this now until he absolutely consolidates an unassailable grip on power, and then he'll start politically liberal. Or he's going to do this now until he accomplishes some economic reform, and then he's going to start. I don't agree. But in any case, if this is who he is and who he's going to be for the remaining 8 years of his presumptive 10-year term, I'll just lay it out. I think there's a growing risk that you won't get evolutionary change, you get disruptive change. And that could involve the sudden and really kind of cataclysmic collapse of Chinese communist rule in some kind of economic crisis, environmental crisis, who knows. And so my question to you is, what should, as a kind of worst case scenario, because this is also an obligation for policymakers, what should policy leaders in Taiwan and policy leaders in the United States be doing and thinking in order to factor that in as a possible scenario?
Well, first of all, they have to be thinking about it. And if I said that they were thinking about it, I'd be lying to you. I mean, the U.S. policy and strategy towards China is based on very linear thinking, which it's policy and strategy that for all intents and purposes is meant for a 1960s Asian tiger, like Singapore or Taiwan or South Korea, to some extent the Philippines and Japan, which is essentially deep engagement of, okay, we know that it's a dictatorship and we can't stand what they do, but deep engagement in order to shape and change it in the direction of, just like what happened in these other countries, until the day that the economic logic takes over and we can really press for change. So, but again, the assumptions are very linear. The assumptions then are continued economic growth of the same economic strategy that China began on in the 1970s, really, 1970s. Export-led growth, which all these other timers did too. Export-led growth, high investment from overseas, and so on and so forth. That's coming to an abrupt end. That's not linear. That is, people in Washington and other places say, well, China is of course China is going to go to its next phase of developing a consumption-driven economy and all the rest of it. You need to make massive reforms of the liberal kind. I call them economic liberalism or political liberalism in order to do that, because consumers need to have things like bank accounts, or places, or mutual funds, or places. Point being, you need to be able to have a functioning, open financial system, and then you wouldn't see all this illicit wealth coming to Palo Alto. You would see it very, not illicitly, I don't know the opposite of the word, explicitly, I suppose, being used within China, and consumers would have savings and investment and all the rest of it in order to have a consumption class. That is not the direction they're going. That is too risky for a guy like Xi, for a consolidator like Xi. So that's sort of in non-linearity. The economic model is coming to an end. I don't see really, except for some kind of Putinism. I don't see where the growth will come from. So China will face some form of economic stagnation as it goes through what you just said, this centralization, economic, this anti-corruption campaign. Yes, absolutely, it is meant to regain the faith of the public and so on. But it is also meant to take down political opponents of Xi Jinping. And so you have two strains right here. One is this centralization of political authority, again, non-linear, because it was going the opposite direction, and this economic stagnation because of the world economy. And so you're absolutely right. You can get discontinuous change of a massive sort. And then there's also the question of the Chinese empire, right? So Xinjiang is getting a little bit tougher, now with what's going on in the Middle East. Hong Kong, we just saw from a CCP perspective, is not the easiest thing to manage. Taiwan, if I'm correct, is going in the other direction than the CCP wants, right? So you have some decay, and you have an empire. And for those of you who know Chinese history, you know what happens when there's imperial decay, right? And so I think the possibilities for a massive discontinuity, as you discussed, is higher in the state of probability. I don't think Washington policymakers of any stripe are thinking about this issue. I mean, it's the kind of thing where you bring up one problem in China that's unmanageable. Let's say, 100 million more men than women of marrying age, and people kind of laugh uncomfortably and move on and say, "Oh, nothing good can come of that." But these are serious problems. With Washington, it's not just Washington. I don't think anyone's really thinking about it. The assumption is just continued kind of linear progress from China's perspective. And so that's why I think it's even more prudent for the United States to move back towards a policy that has as its end state, a democratic and liberal, not elections tomorrow,
right.
but slow, steady, liberal democratic China. Because the alternatives, because it's not going to stay the same. So we might as well throw our cards on the table. The next question is, how do you do that? What's the prudent tools of statecraft? And that gets tougher. And I'd love your thoughts on that too. But one way is to take the existing democratic Asian nations and make that more of a grouping and more attractive, and then you'll see Chinese citizens wanting not to be excluded from that. Another way is there are various ways. How do you affect change within China? I mean, that is very difficult, and the U.S. would have to take some serious risks to do that. But I think at the end of the day, the payoff would be be worth it. Yeah, again, you have to be prudent, and you got to see what you can actually accomplish, and all the rest of it. But because I think we're coming to a point where the CCP will change one way or another, it's even more important to put that on the table.